what I feel very, very, very strongly about is the importance of the role of a mother and the commitment that it requires and the devotion that it requires. And the important thing to remember is that this is a season and it's going to pass, and it's going to pass quickly. This season, and believe it or not, because I remember being in that season and hearing it's a season and not feeling like it was a season. I felt like this is life forever. So you want to give yourself wholeheartedly to the season because it's where God has you right now. And when you're in the midst of raising children, you don't feel the weightiness of it sometimes because you're so caught up in what a mom feels is the mundane. The changing diapers, the discipline, the laundry, the dishes, the cleaning the house. But all these things are not mundane when you know that you're doing it as an act of service and sacrifice to the Lord. It's a holy offering to the Lord. Another thing that God works in the mother, contentment at home. When my kids were young, very young, all four of them, I started a business because I'm not sure why I started a business. I think I want to say because I was out of my mind. But I felt like I was helping. I wanted to help my husband. But there were things in there that the Lord knew needed to be purged. Because I was at home and I loved being home. I love being home. And I love taking care of my children. But the Lord sees our hearts and He knows what's in there that's not quite right. And, you know, we want a pure heart, unmixed with anything, just fully there, fully consecrated, fully devoted to the Lord and what He has me doing in this season, this day, whatever it is. I prayed, Lord, if this business, if it's your will, open the doors and whatever, which He did. Like He paved the way and just provided everything I needed. I didn't know it was because it was going to be a trial. Ultimately, I prayed, Lord, if this gets in my way, in the way of my relationship with you, with Tim, or my children and my home, I'm done. I did it for about at least a year, if not more, and I felt like I was drowning. But it was a really good experience because I pulled my children, because Tim would say, you should have the children do that. And I said, oh no, they're too small. They're very small. And after a while, I had so many orders coming in. I had a commercial kitchen on our property, and I was selling cheesecakes. And there my little ones were in there and washing dishes and just doing all sorts of things that I didn't think they were capable of, that I found they were very capable of. So that was a great lesson, like just push your children more than you think they can do. We have our Monday family day, and the very first time that I waved goodbye as my family went on their family day to the park, and I had to do a big order back home, I said, this is it, I'm done. What the Lord showed me through that was I was at home, but I wasn't fully at home. Like my heart was not content in my home. And this business was on our property, and so I could say, I'm at home, you know, but my heart was not there. And so the Lord showed that to me very, very clearly, and then I was free, and then I was at home. And then little things happened too along the way. I remember the day I was homeschooling, and again, this is like being mom, being all there. And I'm sitting at the table, and I'm like, you know, the shaking knee, and I'm thinking, there's so much to do right now. And then the Lord very clearly spoke to my heart that this is what you're supposed to be doing right now. Be entirely there. Like if you're schooling on the table, just school 100%. Just be there. Everything else that is needing to happen will happen in time. And our children know when we're all divided and spread all over the place. They know that. Just keep in mind, mothers, that this is just a season. So enjoy it. Enjoy it. I felt like the season of when everybody was small, those many years, I felt stretched to the max in every way, like physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally stretched. But that was the Lord's doing. Those were the years that I feel like I grew the most. A lot of sin dealt with. But the Lord was using all of that. Sin is going to come out, and it's just different seasons of life. Like, I think about my single sisters, and this is a season where sin is going to come out in certain ways, and then you get married and sin comes out in other ways that it would have never come out as a single person. So in every season, God is working it together for our good. And a lot of times it's dealing with our sin. Like, the goal is like no fight left in us. And so as all this sin is coming out through the years, and the Lord is so kind to deal with us very graciously and patiently, life really does get easier. It really, really does get easier, because the fight is gone and you're purged of so much sin through the years. And if you yield, if you learn in the process to yield yourself to the Lord and submit to His will and His ways, life gets easier and easier. And then there's no fight left. Like I told you, you're not fighting against the authority over you, whether that's a boss, your parents, your husband, or ultimately the Lord. So strive to be that soft lump of clay in the hands of our God that's pliable and He can work with, and don't have any of those. You know how when you have children and they leave clay out and there's those hard things and they put it all together, and we don't want to have those hard, dry pieces that are stubborn and not workable. And so pray that God would soften our hearts and make us submissive to His will and His ways. As far as not feeling like you're doing enough in the church for mothers, that's a lie, because it can be a lie, I should say. Because if there are opportunities that you can be taking advantage of and you're not because you're being lazy, maybe that might be a scenario. And lazy does not mean, you know what I mean, everybody, by lazy, just sinfully lazy. Like, you have opportunity to serve and you choose the selfish path instead. But it's okay to rest. And, you know, if you're tired and you could do service, you might be doing your family better service by just resting or taking a nap or reading or something along those lines. But we know that there's an enemy. The devil is very always in our ear, always trying to slander and make us feel guilty and ashamed that we're not doing enough. You know, sister so-and-so does more and she homeschools better and they're more hospitable and their relationships are better. I don't feel close with it. That's all. Like, you have to be super on guard and discerning, because so much of that is from the enemy and wanting to crush the mom that's just simply doing the Lord's will, staying at home. It's biblical. I mean, just go back to that. If you're struggling with being at home, it's biblical. We're called to be keepers of home, managers of our home, raising, training children, helping your husband. Don't get too complicated in this season. It's complicated enough. Like, just keep it simple. And we know in Genesis that God provided Adam a helper, and that's who we are for our husbands. And so make sure that you have that in your mind always. Filter, is this helpful for my husband? And the other big filter is respect. Like, our husbands, we're called to respect our husbands. We want to filter what comes out of our mouth, our actions, our decisions, our body language, everything. Is this showing respect for our husband? That's another no fight left in you, just learning the joy and peace of submission to your husband. I had a sister ask me about submission and feeling the burden. Like, you could tell she was burdened, that she desires to just have more of a joyful submission all the time. And so it's important not to overlook and just pass right through heart attitudes. Like, if you're having trouble submitting to your husband, whether it's in general or it's over a certain topic that comes up or an issue that you know is like a button for you, and even if we don't like lash out in rebellion and not submit, we know when our heart is not submitting. We know when we're grumbling against our husband inwardly, but we have to also remember that our inward grumbling against our husband is ultimately against the Lord. But nevertheless, it's good to figure out why I feel this way inside. Why is there a fight? What's the fight? And get to the root of that. I have a regret of not journaling, because you see growth through the years, answer to prayer. That's huge. Even if you can journal prayer, answer to prayer. Because I have a regret. I can only remember so many answers to prayers when I know, like, all those years, miraculous things were happening. Just provision. Just real quick little testimony before a prayer meeting. We were at a Payless, I think it was, and Charity needed shoes. We usually shopped at the thrift store or got hand-me-downs, which was totally fine with me. But somehow we were at Payless, and Charity loved these shoes. I said, oh, I just can't do that. They're too expensive, and they grow so fast, and they wear them for so short a time. So I went to, sorry, sweetie, the Lord will provide. And we go to prayer meeting, and the mother that always handed me down her clothes and shoes handed me down the identical exact pair of shoes we had just seen at Payless. And they were like in new condition, and things like that happened all the time through the years. So I really wish I would have journaled more. For whatever you're dealing with, that you're struggling with, and whatever season of life, single, married, whatever it is, a lot of our problems stem from not thinking right. And the way we think is the way we're going to live. And so you have to be daily and throughout the day renewing your mind, renewing your mind, renewing your mind. I used to have scripture all over our home because I needed my mind renewed. When everybody was small, season was, so busy, mind is distracted. I had tongue verses because I wanted a gentle tongue. I wanted patience. And the Lord worked that out. By the way, if anybody's struggling with these things, like having an issue with, a harsh tone with your kids or raising your voice, these were things that were such a grief to me. And it's not like I was out of control all day long, but just once in a day is too many times. And I felt like I'm going to scare these kids. Like I prayed. It was an earnest prayer every day that God would just control my tongue, get a control. And he did. And it went in stages because I felt like my face would look intense, and inside I was like ready to explode. And it was me. Our problem are not our children, our husband. The problem is us. The Lord helped me to get control first of my outward, but I still felt sometimes like boiling inside. And that's, again, mom's fault, because if you don't discipline right away and you let yourself get angry, that's not your child's fault. It's your fault. If we have to be consistently disciplining quickly so that we don't get frustrated and then they have to deal with our sin. Like, this is what you're called to. So it's not like this is so inconvenient that I have to spank my child. But no, this is your calling. Do what you know is right and trust the Lord's timing for the fruit, for the change, for the answer. But just do what you know is right. Live up to the light you have. Walk in obedience. Walk with the Lord. And it's like, waiting for children to be saved. That's a big one. You pray, and you cry, and you fast. And I told everybody around the world, literally, pray for my kids, pray for my kids. And then you wait patiently upon the Lord. But I want to encourage every mom, hang on tight to God's mercy and kindness, and believe that he put your children in your home not to pour all this truth in them so that they would have a hotter hell to burn in forever, but to equip them to be servants of his and to bring him great glory one day. It's the timing. We have to be subject to the timing of the Lord, and don't lose hope and don't lose heart, no matter how difficult things can look, we don't base our faith on circumstances. We base our faith in God and what he can do. The impossible. We can start wanting to spiral down when we look at circumstances and we think, this is impossible. Nothing is too hard for the Lord. Nothing is impossible for God. So keep hoping in the Lord. God is sovereign. Salvation is of the Lord. And we're very aware of that. But I wasn't going to be guilty of like this hyper Calvinism and, well, he'll save them if they belong to him. No, I was going to be that persistent widow that bothered God all day, every day until he saved them. And he did it. I want everybody to be encouraged here that has kids. Like, there was difficulties, but children, what do we expect? Like, you can train and train and train, but they still have hearts that are against God and opposed to his ways. And for the mom who is wondering about, am I being a good enough example? Am I doing enough for our kids? I've always felt like just do everything you can do. And that's all you can do. But don't do any less than that. Don't be lazy. Don't be sloppy in your Christianity. Give God what he deserves and then enjoy the fruit of that. What I have found is walking close with the Lord all these years, and that was because when I was single, I fell into horrible, horrible sin. And I have wounds today, like that I bear from that season, but it taught me about sin. It taught me that you do not mess around with sin and you do not mess around with God in regards to sin, because he loves his children so much that he's not going to let us get away with sin. And I didn't really know the gravity of that and the weight of that. And I was just a new believer, and I learned right away. I had that very severe discipline and chastening of the Lord that kept me clinging to him ever since. Like, that hasn't been, there have been times that, you have the times when you have dry spells and Lord, where are you? And, but characteristically, by God's grace, out of fear of myself, not because I'm so holy and righteous. I'm afraid of myself because I saw in the beginning what I'm capable of still as a Christian. But I needed to be humbled. I had a lot of self-righteousness that I brought in because I was very, very religious also growing up. Wicked and religious in the church, in the world, a mess. So not only for the sake of, there's a healthy fear of God, but the fruit of that has been wonderful. Out of my desperation, clinging tightly, life has been a blessing. Because when we're walking close with the Lord and we're in his word daily, life is kept in perspective. And so when you have the right perspective that this is not about our best life now, problem-free now that I'm saved. This is about holiness and serving God and fearing God and being conformed and transformed to the image of God. And those things are intense and they're hard. And we were warned right from the beginning that if you follow me, Jesus said, it's going to be hard. The way's narrow, it's hard. Few find it, but at the end, you get paradise with him forever. That's a great deal. Fight for your times with the Lord. And there are, again, different seasons when you have more time. That was another question that came in. What do you do when you have little children, and especially like when you're single and you have like hours with the Lord, then you get married, and if you start having children right away, it can be a real jolt. Like, the time that I used to have with the Lord just doesn't exist anymore. It can exist. If you fight, it's going to be different. It looks different. Some days better. But again, like, I felt so desperate, especially when I started having kids, because I didn't want to sin. Like, I didn't want to be a hypocritical mom. And I really felt a very real connection, like my children were going to suffer the consequences of my sin. I'm not saying, this was a perfect, beautiful picture, but the wonderful thing is God sees our heart. And even when we stumble and fall, and if you lose your temper with your child or speak harshly or disrespectfully to your husband, and you're broken immediately, and you repent, and you're restored with God and whoever else you offended, that's okay. What you don't want to do is be the type of mother who has that loose tongue, who's just spewing out hurtful things, who's causing damage. And it's like that foolish woman who's tearing her house down with her own hands. And that is what you don't want to be. In this season of life, you have to keep things as simple as possible. You have to figure that out. For me, it was like clutter. Like, don't have clutter, because then my head feels cluttered. And everything has a place. Training them well how to fold neatly. And they were doing a lot of folding. We dumped this mound. Do you remember, Grace? We dumped this mound of laundry in the middle of the living room floor, and all of us would get around and start folding. Time management, like the busier you get, the more you have, moments are critical in the day. There's different things that we can be tempted to. Social media and all that stuff, it's a blessing and it's a curse at the same time, because it can be a nice little outlet, but then it's hard to do it for just a minute, and it can suck time. 15 minutes can be used in a different way, like to fold a little, or to wash some dishes, or to sit down and play cards, or tea party or whatever. I say that because that was always on my mind, getting down with your children. It's kind of like the times when we would have spending freezes throughout our life. Tim would say, we're on a spending freeze. And you find when you're on a spending freeze, which doesn't literally mean you don't spend a penny, because I have to buy groceries, but when you go buy groceries, your mind is so sharp, like only the necessities, and you realize, oh, I don't really need that. And that's the way we need to be in this season with our time, just sharp with our time. Some people are good about scheduling. I was never good about scheduling. I would encourage, if you can schedule, because when I have scheduled, it seems like I get more done because your time is spoken for. And so I'm more of a list maker than a scheduler. But my sister's while she was in that same season of life, she's like 9:43 into 10. That would drive me crazy. But she functioned really well that way. So if you're geared like that, do it, because you can get more done. When the children were very little, I was doing more like bulk cooking, and I might like cook a bunch of chicken, like that nasty 10-pound bag of leg quarters. They're so like mainly fat, but they're really cheap. And I would just shred it and bag it up in small baggies and dice tons of onions and have them in little baggies. And because I made casseroles a lot during those seasons, because it's stretched. And so just having a lot of those staple vegetables and whatever on hand, so that you can just dump it all and cheese over it, and everybody loves it. Put cheese over anything and everybody loves it. Yeah, so the meal planning, scheduling, simple life, sharp with every moment. And those were some things that helped me. You really want to know if you're helping your husband or not, because you might be, killing yourself doing certain things, or really, like Bergen said, it's not even really helpful. It's not a big deal to him. So yeah, communication is really key. But sometimes there are husbands that are really, really, really sensitive. They almost give you liberty to be lazy. Does that make sense? Well, it can be so kind and merciful and loving of the husband, but just try to discern, like, okay, I can work harder than this. When you hear you stay at home all day, but that's such a privilege. You're raising the next generation. You're pouring into these souls, these people that are going to grow up and be servants of the Lord and function in society. Like, I'm so thankful that my kids go out into their workplace, in school, shining as light, sharing the gospel, being different. That just doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen naturally. That happens living together, home life, day in, day out. A mom that's at home and she's happy at home and she's content at home, and the kids are happy to be at home. Just like the children, we train them and it's a process. The discipline doesn't work overnight. Well, don't be discouraged if you're dealing with discontentment or whatever, because God is training us and we're in the process. I don't want to crush anybody. Like if you're feeling like, man, I'm really struggling with this or that she's talking about, as long as you're working through it and striving to grow in it and dealing with the sin that you see in your life, you never want to let your time with the Lord go by the wayside because you're so busy. That has to be the number one priority. Like Mary, Martha was very distracted and busy about serving and doing good things. Like it doesn't say she was sinning, she was serving. But Jesus told her, Mary has chosen the one thing necessary. And Mary was sitting at his feet. But if you don't have that in place, you're going to try to draw from other things for your happiness and your contentment. You're going to try to draw from your children, from your hobbies, from your spouse, money, internet, social media, whatever it is. We were made to worship God. And so if we're not worshiping him and drawing everything, our satisfaction and content from him, we are going to seek it elsewhere. And singleness is uniquely difficult. There's challenges as a single, and there's the feelings, and they can fluctuate. Seasons where you're more content, seasons when you're really struggling with wanting to be married, or just loneliness. Those things are very real. But again, what are we thinking about? What are we meditating on? If we're walking with the Lord and meditating on things above and what our life is really all about, we can find peace and contentment. And sometimes we have to really fight for it because it's hard. But there's peace to be had in all circumstances. And there's contentment to be enjoyed in all seasons of life if you're first drawing from the Lord. In all seasons, in all circumstances, be thankful, and your life will be different. Here's one that I had more than one person ask about, which is devotional time with your husband or without your husband. I have heard a lot of really wonderful things about husband and wives going through books of the Bible, or just, books outside the Bible, praying together every morning or praying together every night. That's wonderful. If your husband wants to do that, if your husband is neutral and you feel like you would really like to do that, like it would really help you, and you bring that to your husband, that's good. Tim and I, we've always had separate devotional lives. We talk obviously about the Lord, about the scriptures, about books we're reading throughout life together. But when we first got married, we were reading together, and I don't know, it just wasn't for us. And I don't know if that sounds weird, and it probably does sound weird if you do your devotional time together with your husband. With your husband. But we just walk very independently, and I'm really thankful for that, because when I first got married, I was baby brat spoiled wife, because I was coming from a home where I was the baby and was treated like it and very spoiled and whatever. I got married and I didn't know I was like that because at home we all loved each other like that. We all treated one another very lovingly in this Hispanic culture that I was raised in. And then I got married, and Tim was from a totally different culture. I had questions about cultural differences when you marry in different cultures and the challenges that come through that. I'm thankful that the Lord helped me through the years, and especially because Tim ended up being a pastor. The Lord has taught me, like early on, to walk with him, walk with the Lord, and be most dependent on him. You can imagine like the rich resource that he is. I mean, he's my walking concordance, he's my walking commentary. I mean, the consultation is ongoing, but as far as sitting down 10 a.m. every day, that just doesn't happen. Now, we've had times together, many times, especially when our children were lost, and especially when Joshua was lost at the end, right before God saved him, where we would be on our knees at our bedside pleading with the Lord. There was so much power in those times. I felt God was hearing us. Joshua was out, and I felt so at peace. I don't know what he's doing, where he is, but we know that God knows, and he's powerful, and we're calling upon him, and we're relying on his power to do what we can't do. That's the hardest thing when you have teenagers that are rebelling against the Lord. You feel so powerless. That's why you have to stick close to the Lord and pray and keep things, like I said earlier, in perspective. Because when we're going through trials, if we don't maintain a right and biblical perspective, we will quickly become discouraged, even depressed. You are particularly vulnerable. It's an opportune time, so look out for it. I'm going on another question now. The wife that has a stronger personality than the husband has to be very mindful to create situations, make decisions, choices that will build him up. Because unlike the more naturally inclined leader, like say for example Tim, like I married a very strong leader. I don't have any trouble getting behind him because he's following God and he's praying and seeking the will of God. But if you have a husband that maybe is either by temperament not so strong, or spiritually, maybe you might be saved longer or more mature or whatever the case, you have to be mindful to get behind him. If you want him to be a good leader, a better leader, you have to be a good or better follower, an encourager. And you have to think of things. Think of things to say. Words are very powerful to build up our husbands. There's communication difficulties, or not difficult, well, they can be difficulties, and they typically are when you're first married, where you have one, I call him the free communicator, that's me, and then Tim is more reserved. In marriage, it can be difficult when you are, you have a hard time bearing your heart, and that your spouse wants to hear your heart. I deal a lot with women in marriage where the husband is the free speaker, and he's wanting to hear more and more and more, and she's like, that's all I have, you know. What happened with Tim and I is I learned that not everybody communicates like I do, or my family that I grew up in. So I thought Tim had problems. I thought he had communication issues. Like he was all my problems. Like any problem we had, it was his fault. But that was very prideful and again self-righteous of me. So the Lord had to purge me of all these things, and I found out no, he doesn't have communication problems. He just has different communication. And so as soon as I established that I needed to learn how he communicates, and he learned how I communicate. But the biggest help, which this is so amazing, how when you, again, I needed to learn to draw all my desires and needs and expectations down from heaven, from the Lord, then I'm full all the time. So whatever I get from anybody, but from my husband, is I want to say bonus. Like we should have communication in marriage and whatever, and we're gonna work on it, and you're gonna expect it, but you're not like, I need more, you know. It's like, okay, you know. So that's what happened to me. I started thinking, I am sucking the life out of this poor man. I need the Lord more than anything, and that helped him. Like the pressure came off of him Because it's like the more you put pressure on somebody, it seems like the more that type locks up and they can't like freely communicate like you want. So it's all counterproductive backwards. But if you draw down from the Lord everything, and you're patient and you're just satisfied with whatever he brings to the table, the Lord blesses that. Because don't we know that the Lord can change us and change our spouses? Also, the other thing is dying to yourself. That was humongous for me, huge. Like, that was life-changing. It sounds like Christianity 101, but when you get married, you really, really see that need moment by moment throughout your day with your husband, with your children, dying to yourself and preferring their needs, their preferences, and the supernatural happens. Like, the Lord steps in, and I don't have to make things happen. The Lord causes things to happen. So what has happened over the years, when I very early on in marriage started figuring these things out, I was content with the Lord, and the Lord helped him to start communicating more and more and more. You know, it's not even an issue now. And the wonderful thing is, what I love about what happened was when I backed off, draw down, Lord started working, and I could see him trying so hard. And his trying made me so happy because he's trying and I'm satisfied. It was just a beautiful thing.